Please keep in mind that I'm speaking about this from the perspective of somebody who works and lives in the US. And while there are some cultural aspects that do spread across the pond to Europe, I'm not really sure how much this effect has on um, how do you find a job in Asia or Japan, China, and elsewhere. So take it with a giant grain of salt. Also, I'm not really sure how this affects India as well, but people have told me in the past that the US tends to emanate this kind of culture and things will start to impact other countries a little bit later for good and for bad. So maybe this is an early warning system of how things are happening in the US and how this might affect other countries as well. But again, just keep in mind that I'm talking about this purely from the US perspective. So you might disagree with some of it. And I would love to hear like how and why it's different because, it's just another data point for me as well. I want to be very specific about this because when you talk about case studies, portfolios, these things could mean different things, right? I want to be clear that I'm talking about product designers and UX and UI designers working in digital tech companies. So not really talking about brand designers, content designers, or graphic designers, etc. And we also want to define what a portfolio is. When I say portfolio in this talk, I mean a website or a PDF sometimes, but a website that encapsulates all your case studies. So it has your About Me section, talks about your work experience to some extent, but mostly it shows your design work. And a case study typically is, in my opinion, a story of how you did your work at a certain company on a certain product. So it has like beginning, middle, and end, right? So the case studies typically represents individual companies you worked at or products, and the portfolio encapsulates it. There are also two types of portfolios, in my opinion. I think there's an online portfolio that is your website that is shown to recruiters and hiring managers, and people typically spend only a few seconds to look at it and evaluate it. The biggest difference is that you are not there to introduce your portfolio. You are not there at all. They might know of you somewhat through your LinkedIn profile, or maybe they spoke with you over the phone very briefly, but you are not there to explain anything. You're not there to say, well, we did it this way because of this and this and this, and this company was like this, and I'm like this. You're not there at all. Whatever they understand or know about you is entirely through the website, through your portfolio, or through your LinkedIn. So that's a key point. And the other portfolio is something that you present, or really what I'm going to call is an online presentation deck that is typically shown in the mid to late rounds of your interview process. Typically, in that case, you have many more minutes. And most importantly, you are there to introduce yourself, to introduce the work you did, and to answer any questions you might have. So if you're talking about the online portfolio, typically you only have a few seconds to make an impression, to communicate who you are, what you do, your unique value proposition. It's typically quickly scanned by the recruiter or hiring manager. And what they're trying to do is to figure out, do they want to invest more time into you or not? It's not really meant to decide, are you the right fit for this company and to make a decision right now. It's not really meant to understand your whole life story. It's really just to say, well, I'm going to spend 5 seconds looking at this. Should I spend another 30 minutes to get on a call with you, right? It's a quick snap decision oftentimes. They're scanning, they're relying on their intuition, their biases oftentimes. And you have to understand that in order to make the best use case, the best use of your time, the limited time that you have. The other one is your in-person presentation, which typically has a much longer window of 5 to 20 minutes. And you're there to explain stuff. You're there to talk about the work, to answer questions. You need to separate the two. I've seen a lot of designers use their online portfolio for their presentation at the end of the interview round. That might work back in 2022 when hiring was going really well. But now when it's much more competitive, to some hiring managers, which I don't fully agree with, but to some hiring managers, that looks lazy. You did not put in the time to customize it to the audience, right? And you're kind of taking a risk by doing that. So in those cases, you do need to spend more time. You do need to make sure that the presentation deck is polished. There isn't a ton of text on the screen. So for example, the presentation I'm giving right now is one of those presentations. I'm here to present this. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to explain stuff. I don't need a ton of text on my screen. In fact, each slide will only have maybe 1 or 2 sentences at most. And oftentimes it's just a few phrases. It's there to really help me remind myself, what am I talking about? What should I talk about next? It's not there to explain everything, because when a viewer is reading stuff and listening at the same time, they have to make a conscious decision to choose one over the other. They cannot consume media from both visual and auditory at the same time. It's really difficult to. And when you try to do that, you end up confusing people. People lose track. You lose your audience. So know your audience, know which format you're using and why you're using it, and leverage it to the maximum possible, right? So if this were an online presentation, if this were an online website and I'm not here to talk about it, I would have much more text, much more imagery, just so that people can like really dig into it and read more. In fact, for visual presentations, I oftentimes don't use images because I just really want to focus on me, my face as I'm talking about it. But sometimes, images do help. And the issue is that people conflate the two, which I talked about a little bit earlier, which is people think I can use one for the other, and I can put a lot more text in my in-person presentation, and I can use less text for online presentation. You need to understand the differences between the two and use it accordingly. What I find really interesting when I talk about case studies is that case studies have been around for a very long time. And I would say in the time I started reading case studies, and when I first started out in design more than 10 years ago, it really hasn't changed. It's still the same format. And for whatever reason, we kind of stuck with it and just kind of ran with it for the longest time. And what's also really weird is that case studies, the formula or the way it's constructed was popularized by boot camps, which I don't think senior designers should be listening to oftentimes, because the people who are teaching it at boot camps often aren't super senior, and the way they set it up doesn't make a lot of sense for more experienced designers. But for whatever reason, we still adhere to it. And that really begs the question, why do we do that? Why is it so hard for things to change? So think about, why are we doing it this way? Does it still serve me? And the format that it typically has of research, personas, wireframes, card sorting, does that communicate your unique value proposition, the value you bring to a company, or does it not work anymore? What's also interesting is that AI tooling, with the advent of all these AI tools like Claude Code, Magic Patterns, Figma Make, etc., it's really reset expectations as to how portfolios should look, what people should be able to glean from it. And it's ironic because the tooling themselves, in my opinion, really are not that good yet, at least for design. Like, it's fine for coding. I use Claude Code to build stuff all the time. But when it comes to design work, it takes a lot of time to move a few pixels around, to make a few small changes. The cycle of having an idea of how to change something and seeing how it looks on your screen is much, much longer now. It takes much longer with AI than it is to go into Figma and just to move a few pixels. So it's weird that even though the AI tooling has not caught up on the design side, like I would say cloud design is not ready at all. Yet hiring managers are expecting designers to have fully polished portfolios that are built using AI. So it's really important for us to figure out, how do we use this tool in a way that meets the weird, super high expectations that hiring managers have, and not make it look like it was built with AI. So for the purpose of this talk, we're going to focus exclusively on online case studies. Like, in-person presentations, a whole other ballgame. But my opinion is that most designers are getting tripped up in the online case study portion of their interview cycle. They tend to send out portfolios, people look at it, and they don't respond. They never hear back. They don't get any feedback. And I think this is probably the most valuable portion that we can focus on. So currently, there's a huge emphasis on visual. I think I talked about it probably like 3 or 4 years ago even. We used to talk more about UX strategy. We used to talk about product strategy, about research. And for whatever reason, last 4 years or so, since the mass layoffs started post-COVID, we've focused much more on visuals. And I think partially it's because when layoffs happened early on, design leaders were thinking about, okay, instead of having 5 key hires next year, I only have 2. I no longer can have super senior design strategists who don't do any visual design and they're UX researcher, and then 2 visual designers to all work together. That's 4 people. Instead, if I only have 2 headcount, I should probably hire 2 generalists who are good at visual design, who are kind of decent enough at everything else. That'll help me, get over the hump to cover the needs of my company and my team. So that's kind of my operating theory, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. The point is that visual design matters more now than before, unfortunately. Well, depending on who you are, right? And this has a cascading effect on how people review portfolio. So the best analogy I can think of right now is like when you talk about Yelp, Google Maps, and for people in Japan, Table Log, you look for restaurants in many ways the same way you might look for a designer. And I can like quickly just show you how that might be, how that might work. So let's say that I'm trying to find the best restaurant in Dumbo, which is my neighborhood in Brooklyn. So if I were to go out to my neighborhood and just like look at all the restaurants available, there are probably like 100 restaurants. And if I try to find the best place to have dinner, it would take me, if I go to every single restaurant, have dinner there, sit down, and then, after dinner, evaluate them and say, oh, this is like 4 stars, 5 stars, whatever. It would take me probably hundreds of hours to figure out which is the best restaurant. And it also cost me a lot of money, a ton of money to eat at every single restaurant. So we rely on tools like Yelp. So when I go into Yelp, the first thing I might do is I sort it by highest rated. So I don't really like look at all the restaurants out there. I just like start to see, okay, I want to only focus on the ones that are highly rated. So that takes me like 2 seconds to click on that. And then I kind of scroll through it, kind of look at the photos. Does this look like something I want to eat? Nah, not really. It's all right. This looks good. I do like sushi a lot. So maybe I'll click into it, open up a tab. Pro Street restaurant, been there before, pretty good. And as I'm looking through it, I'm spending a little bit more time evaluating it. And then I might look through the photos some more and just kind of look through it. So think of this as somebody's portfolio. You're kind of digging a little bit deeper after you evaluate their rating or like their pedigree, where they worked, etc. And then I might spend even more time and start reading reviews and see, okay, well, why do people like this place so much? What do they say about it? I start reading, and that can take many more minutes as well. So it's basically going through levels of increasing intensity in evaluation as well as investment of time and energy. Using this analogy, you can start to see that design hiring is somewhat similar. You're going through a funnel when it comes to hiring, and each step of the funnel dramatically increases the amount of time you have to invest in this candidate. So when you first scan somebody's portfolio, that's a few seconds, 5, 10, 20 seconds. And then you go into the next round, which is your initial interview, which is at least 30 minutes. And then you go through the mid-round interviews, which are going to be like an hour probably. And then the final round is sometimes like 3 to 5 to 6 hours long. So it's increasing levels of investment. And because of this, when you talk about how quickly it is to grok or to understand how good somebody is at something, visual design is like the fastest one. It takes like maybe 5 seconds to see, is this person a good visual designer? When it comes to strategy or research, you can't really see it right off the bat. You kind of have to ask questions, right? You could kind of figure it out by where they've worked. Like if they worked at Airbnb, you're like, okay, Airbnb is a design-led company. They should be decent at visual design. They need to be good at certain things to work there. But generally speaking, to understand if somebody's really good at design strategy, product strategy, you need to spend probably 20 minutes to ask them questions, to like kind of test them out a little bit, to talk about their experience in a much deeper way than looking at somebody's portfolio in terms of visual design. So keep that in mind. And that's why when we talk about the increasing number of candidates that are in the hiring funnel nowadays, like in the old days, it used to be something like you put out a job listing, there's like 30 candidates applying, and you're like, okay, I can kind of look through everyone with equal amount of time. Nowadays, you might have 200 candidates. There are job postings with over 1,000 candidates. You have no way of looking through everyone. So you kind of use a method that I talked about earlier on Yelp to kind of like evaluate, to skim it really quickly, and then go deeper and like choosing wisely who you invest additional time in. So the process, you scan it, you have a short list, you do a first interview and a final interview, and each stage it just creates more and more time. So everything I've said up to this point, I would argue is widely accepted. Like I would have a hard time finding somebody who would realistically argue against me about any of the points I've talked about earlier. But from here on out, I'm going to talk about stuff that's a bit more controversial that, I'm going to expect some pushback on this. And feel free in the chat to talk about, you don't agree with this stuff for this reason. We can dig into it. We have time. So first thing I want to talk about is taste, because we hear this a lot recently. You hear from hiring managers, founders, recruiters, other designers. They talk about taste. And I find it really interesting because I find taste to be really hard to evaluate and to define as well. And I've talked to a lot of designers. I've asked them, how do you define taste? And it really comes down to like, I'll know it when I see it, right? Like, how do you know if somebody has better taste than somebody else? And it really comes down to like how they perceive somebody's capabilities, their intelligence, their design skills, which to me is not really rooted in anything that's objective. It's more of a feeling, and it can be colored by biases. So for example, if you know somebody worked at Airbnb and they're now working in Anthropic or Figma, you might assume they have pretty good taste, right? Probably maybe more so than somebody who works at Bank of America or JPMC. And that might be not true. Who knows? So there's a really good article in the New Yorker by, I forgot his name, Kyle Chayka. And it's talks about why tech bros are really obsessed with taste right now. And it basically says the reason why founders and tech bros really like the concept taste is because it allows them to communicate their own higher level decision making in a way where other people are like, oh, that kind of makes sense. It's like, trust me, bro. Like, I am really good at this thing that I do. Like, I'm here to make really good decisions as CEO, as a founder. And my taste is going to help me make a ton of money. And there's one paragraph near the end that I find to be really, really important. And it says the 18th century French philosophers who established a definition of taste in Western thought consider it an ineffable quality, a reminder that God-given goodness in each of us recognizes that of the rest of the world. Voltaire once wrote that in order to have taste, it is not enough to see and to know what is beautiful in a given work. One must feel beauty and be moved by it. And currently, no large language model, no LLM, no AI has yet been programmed to feel anything. And no number of branded baseball caps is going to change that. Branded baseball cap, great. So that's really interesting. It's basically arguing that by the definition of taste by French philosophers, in order for you to have taste in design, you need to be a human. You need to be able to feel things. And AI is not capable of doing that yet. Maybe ever. And the concept of AI and technology having good taste it's weird, but that's kind of where we are currently. And by the way, I had to look up the word ineffable because I am, not a good reader. So ineffable is an adjective used to describe something that's too great or beautiful or extreme to be adequately expressed or described in words. So the irony is that by the essence of taste is that it's indescribable. That's tough. So when we talk about taste, I think it means many, many different things. You ask one person, they have a different definition of taste compared to somebody else. So I'm going to give you my definition of taste. And I think when people talk about taste on LinkedIn, on X, when founders and hiring managers, designers talk about taste currently in the popular vernacular, it's not really about design. It's not really about what's good, what looks good, what feels good. It's more about politics. It's about describing who you are, what kind of power you have, how you can build power, and who you align with. Like which clique or which group are you a part of? And it's about who's in the in group. Because unfortunately, if you go to config, this is my first time going to config, but I will bet dollars to donuts that on config, people will form groups. And I think design, for whatever reason, has become more cliquey clicky lately. Like it's more about who you know, what kind of group you're in. And I feel like designers of a single stratosphere, like if you work at Anthropic, you're probably going to hang out with other AI designers who are in similar companies. And it's going to be harder for like a JPMC designer to be part of that group. Like that's just how I see things nowadays. And I think that when you talk about taste and craft, it's really about signaling where do you belong, who are you a part of, and where your design level skills are, and like where you can get hired, for example. It's about status in many ways, and it's hard for me to see it past that. It's not really about describing aesthetic judgment that people say it is, but honestly, I don't really see it anymore. So when it comes to craft and taste, oftentimes you hear from design influencers or content creators like me, and I feel like when content creators talk about design and taste and stuff, they're really trying to build engagement, and it's about understanding and viewing what is popular within design and then borrowing from it or trying to show proximity to that. So you'll see a lot of content creators like pulling in guests from top companies like Cursor, Perplexity, Figma, Anthropic, etc. Even though they've never worked there, like even though they might not be able to get a job there, but by surrounding yourselves with these other high level or perceived to be high level designers, you can make yourself seem more capable, more popular, more powerful, more engagement, etc. And it's, I will say that one defense that most design content creators use, and me included, is that I know about design because I talk to a lot of other designers and other hiring managers. It is a data point, but at the end of the day, I don't feel like doing design is the same as talking about design. Like you really need to do design in order to understand it. And I think a lot of the current conversations we're having online right now is done by designers who are talking a lot about it as opposed to doing the work. In fact, the more time you have to talk about it, the less time you have to do the work. And that is feeding into this self-fulfilling prophecy or this cycle where it becomes more and more extreme. And I feel like we're in the very extreme end of things right now when it comes to what is taste, what is design, what is craft. So curation in a way is taste, right? So as these design content creators like platform other designers of top level companies, they're basically showcasing they have good taste, right? And to me, it's not really about good taste. Like it's not hard to point out a designer from Airbnb and say, hey, I want you to be on my show, because it's easy to say Airbnb, Anthropic, and OpenAI. Once you have that name as a guest on your show, people would automatically come and see it. Like it doesn't really matter what your idea is. It doesn't really matter, what they're going to say. It's really about the name, because people will gravitate toward that. And it's the same thing with design conferences. Like they all need to have big names as headlines, like the chief design officer at Ramp or so on and so forth needs to be there in order to sell tickets. And that has its own problems, to say the least. So these are the companies we talk about: Anthropic, Cursor, Perplexity. And yeah, like there is this symbiotic relationship between content creators, design tooling companies, and designers at these top level companies. Like they all need to kind of feed off each other or to prop each other up in order to succeed. And it's kind of like how you see NVIDIA being invested in, or NVIDIA investing in AI companies. Like they're all like just moving money around and propping each other up. And once one of these companies fail, there's going to be a cascading or domino effect that affects everything else. So who can masquerade as taste. And product design hiring is a part of that, unfortunately. So design hiring is cultural. It's about defining, it's about who do you know? It's about who do you know and what do you know and who can you hire? So oftentimes you see hiring managers copy other companies. So when a company like Google starts giving out design exercises, take-home design exercises, you see other companies follow. Like I remember interviewing at a startup that doesn't have any designers, and I would be the first design hire. The founders knew immediately, okay, we got to give a take-home design exercise. We need to, do a whiteboard exercise. they don't know anything about design, but they just know from reading about how Google does their design hiring and other FAANG companies do design hiring, they're going to copy that. And that's the self-fulfilling cycle. And it's just endless. I'm doing not great on time, so I'm going to skip this, but there's a really good story about bananas, monkeys, and showers, and how this has led to us not really knowing why we do the things we do beyond saying, well, this has always been how we do it. So why don't we just continue doing so? So why do we do it this way? Culture, to be honest. And the ritual of design hiring just outlives the usefulness oftentimes. And there's also a ton of advice out there. I would say Lena Kuhl, Dan Weiner, and Michael Rittering are examples of people who give excellent advice in this area. And they go very deep into it as well. They explain why it's this way. They back it up evidence oftentimes. And Lena is a very experienced design recruiter. So she's been around the block. She's seen it thousands of times. And I feel like she's turned all this intuition and experience into actionable things for designers to do. And at the same time, I feel like by doing these things, you're kind of feeding into the cycle as well. So this talk really isn't about like why we should change necessarily. It's more about like identifying what it is and how we can navigate it. So currently, when we talk about design portfolios with AI tools, the expectation is that your portfolio should showcase how you build products and features using AI tooling. And ideally, your portfolio is built with an AI tool. You also should have strong personal branding. So you see a lot of the top design portfolios out there have branding design work, even though in most cases, as a product designer, you're not doing brand design work at all. But having that skill is extremely useful during the hiring process. Ideally, it should also have some tasteful animation, some delightful elements in it to make it look like you're a top designer. You should also focus on visuals, fewer words. Like it used to be very word or text heavy, but maybe like 6-7 years ago. But nowadays it's like, we want to see less text. We just want to see some carefully organized informational hierarchy, and then a ton of really beautiful visuals to showcase why you're a good designer. Sorry, I have like really bad allergies right now. Give me 1 second. And the weirdest thing to me is that the portfolio itself should be judged like a design product, right? Like it's no longer good enough to have really beautiful case studies. Now the expectation is that the portfolio that encapsulates our case studies, it needs to be like a beautiful feature. Like your portfolio homepage should be a product, and you should spend way more time on that than anything else. And that's the expectation now, right? And also a caveat is that when it comes to building with AI tools, it needs to look like it was not built with an AI tool, which I will expound on later. So while people wanting to use AI to build your portfolio, they don't want to know. They don't want to clearly see that it was built with AI. Because when it comes to AI built anything, like anything that's one shot, anything that's like done without a ton of like human intervention and human like add-on near the end, it looks like AI slop. So for example, when you look at Claude design, I remember looking at it, like being one of the first users for it. I was like, oh, this is actually pretty decent. Like it has tasteful choices of color, of fonts, text, and the negative space is not bad. Like it's better than say Figma, Make, and other tools out there. But within a week, after so many people have started using and cranking out stuff from Claude design, and you start to see all the other stuff that it's been made using that tool, you realize they all look the same. It's like a sans serif font, and some like earthy colors, tones in red, orange, earthy greens, some blues, like very low blue actually. But generally the background's like sepia toned, and that turns it into AI slop. So AI slop isn't really like something looks bad. It just looks like it was made with an AI tool, because AI is very consistent currently when it comes to design, because you have to, like, I believe model designers, the ones who are writing the prompts for these design tools, they're using the same templates. So it's really only capable of cranking out like 5 or 6 different variations. And human eyes are very good at identifying patterns. And once we identify the pattern that AI has made, it becomes AI slop. So whatever you make using AI tools, it cannot look like it was made with an AI tool. Like it cannot be obvious. So what that means is that you have to be very conscious in how you design your portfolio. You have to build it incrementally, bit by bit. You cannot one shot it. It's not going to work. I guarantee you. And you have to make very deliberate choices of, I'm going to use this font. I'm going to use this color, this kind of spacing. I do not think you can write something like make it look good, give it more breathing room, give it more negative space, or use a cooler color, or make it look sophisticated, etc. None of those adjectives work. You have to be very specific. You have to say, I'm going to use this font. I'm going to use Tahoma or Inter. It has to be this size, roughly speaking, in this breakpoints. And I'm going to use these colors. So I'm going to give you a few hex codes to use. And the margin should be around this much. The curved corners should be around this many pixels or this many, this size. You cannot rely on AI to make those decisions for you, because when it does make these decisions, it looks like AI slop, unfortunately. So one thing that I find really interesting is the portfolio review culture is really, in my mind, controlled or dictated by 4 groups of people or designers. And to me, it's like the companies that make the AI tools right now have an outsized impact on what's considered to be a good portfolio, right? I think every AI tool is trying to convince other designers, you have to use our tool in order to be considered a top designer. If you want to be a top 1% designer, you want to be an AI native designer, you're using Claude Code because it's the most advanced features, the most advanced UI. You cannot be using something like Lovable, or you cannot be using something like, I think Lovable is a good example, or Replit, right? You need to use like Cursor or Claude Code in a CLI environment to look like a legitimate AI native designer. And I don't think there's a strong correlation there, but that's kind of the messaging that we're getting from advertisements, from marketing. The second group is designers who work near those companies. So designers who currently work at Anthropic. I think Jenny Wen has a really big impact on design currently, even though most of us do not see the work that she does. Or at least we're not able to pinpoint the exact things that she's designing at Anthropic that we can say, this is definitely Jenny Wen's work, right? And her talk about the design process is dead has been shared so many times. Now people really are convinced that design process is dead because she started it. And I think these designers at these top companies have an outsized impact that controls the narrative of how do we evaluate somebody's abilities or capabilities as a designer. And designers who want to work at these companies start to follow that because they're thinking, well, if I want to work at this company, it would make sense for me to look at the portfolios of this designer who works at this company, because that is a bar they've set as to how I would get hired there. Designers selling their strengths. So I noticed that designers oftentimes try to oversell their own abilities. They would say, well, I'm a strategy-focused designer, and I think strategy is super important. And visual designers will say, well, visuals are really important because that's the first thing that people, grok or people see right away. And there's also influencers, I think, also have a pretty outsized impact because they're the ones who have to reach the audience size to choose who to platform. So when they platform designers from Perplexity, from Ramp, from Anthropic, they're telling their followers, their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers, saying, this is what a good designer is. And what they say is how you should prepare your portfolios. So these 4 groups are kind of how I see the portfolio culture being changed by. So what's the point of a portfolio? And the question I often ask is like, why are we doing it this way? Like, why are we spending so much time on it? Why do we do it this way? Is it meant for hiring, or is it something else? And if it's meant for hiring, how do these changes enable us to hire more effectively, to really understand somebody's fit within a company, and trying to figure out, like, is this person going to create the positive business impact that I need at my company? And I don't really see that correlation currently, but that's just me. How do we do these things to enable us to hire better. I don't know if using AI tools necessarily give you much data on, is this designer going to fit in within our culture, within our company? But currently, that's just how we see things. It's like, you must use these tools in order to work at our company. And it's shown in almost every interview when designers or hiring managers ask you, how do you currently use AI in your design process? So ultimately, like, who benefits from all this anxiety that's being created by everyone else, right? Like, why do we feel like we're being held hostage by AI tools or AI usage currently? And the people who benefit are not designers. It's often the content creators who are making money through sponsorship deals. Like, every time a content creator talks about a company like Perplexity, they're often being paid either by Perplexity or other AI tooling companies. They have to show how positive they feel about AI tooling in order to get more business. You'll notice that virtually no design content creator, big ones, will say anything negative about AI. And that's just a matter of money, right? Like, there's that famous saying, like, it's hard to make someone see something without, if their livelihood is dependent on it. Like, I'm butchering this phrase, but if your livelihood is dependent on your contracts with AI tooling companies, you're not really going to be able to say anything negative about them. So, and also, like, how much daily work is represented? Like, to be honest, like, if you're showing all this brand and animation work, how much time do you really have to devote to that once you get into the role? Your day-to-day work as a designer is massively different from the work that you do in your portfolio. So we have about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about like top portfolios, because there are a few portfolios that we see over and over again on places like Reddit, on LinkedIn, when people ask, what's the top portfolio? Like, you often ask recruiters, like, show me some top portfolios that have made it through the hiring process. And time again, I often see these same names. There's Marco, there's Bao, and there's Perry Wang. Perry Wang's portfolio on Reddit was like super popular a few years ago because he was a supposedly junior designer who got like hired at Google and Discord. And it's funny because, like, when you look at his portfolio, you realize that he is not a junior designer at all. He is a very, very good designer who has overachieved in many ways. Like, sure, he's only worked for 2 or 3 years at the time, but he was a better designer than many designers who worked like 8 or 9 years. So to say that this is a good junior portfolio is really not being fair. It's like comparing, somebody to, like, saying, oh, if this is a good runner, Usain Bolt. Yeah, he's a good runner. Like, you should run like him. But like, no, that dude is a freak of nature and it's like a genetic anomaly and has trained super, super hard to be where he is today. And that's not, you cannot apply that to, somebody who is starting out in like high school running, right? And same with Marco's portfolio. I'm sure many of you have seen this. I'm gonna probably make this a little bit bigger. It's a bento box design, and it is not scalable in any way. And a lot of it, I don't actually understand. Like, when I'm looking at this, I don't understand what is being shown here, but this is widely considered to be a very good portfolio. And I've seen multiple recruiters mention this, and like, this is also not a popular interaction pattern where you have an interactive screen. So instead of static screens of your designs, you have this interactive screen that people can click on, can scroll through. And that's really cool in many ways. But yeah, like, I take issues to it. Like, I think Marco is a talented designer, and I think this is a good portfolio. But at the same time, the messaging we're tying to this is not super effective in terms of propagating or moving forward design hiring anyway, in my mind. So what makes this a good portfolio? The first 10 seconds, you're impressed by it. You're like, this is cool. These are some cool interactions. These are some cool, beautiful imagery. The text and spacing is on point. This person understands design craft. They really care about the little details. They really sweat that. But if I try to read deeper, there's really not much else there. I can only tell that they are a good and clever interaction designer. But I know that if I submit this portfolio as a recruiter to any company, chances are very, very high they'll say, I want to, interview this person. Other one is by Bao. And why people love Bao's portfolio so much is not his work, which are, by the way, excellent. Like I checked out Demo Studio, and it's a well vibe coded piece of software. And Bao is a design engineer who currently is in Columbia University. So he's in his like maybe early 20s, or maybe he's still a teenager. I don't know, but he's very young, and he is extremely talented for sure. And people keep mentioning his work because again, it's like you want to prop up the outliers, the ones who are going to showcase how powerful and how effective you can be using AI tooling. Even though I would say Bao again is an outlier. Most designers currently in universities in school do not come close to this, and and that's okay. And when you talk about like what's being shown here, it's like yes, it is very delightful. It's like you have a bunch of ducks, they're moving around. Are you ever going to make this at work at any of the tech companies? Probably not. But again, this is still very, very cool, and people keep referencing it. Do I think Bao is a great designer and this is a great portfolio? Yes and yes. I think he's extremely talented, and this is still very cool. But I don't necessarily understand why people are so obsessed over it, and why people consider this to be where everybody else should be moving toward. Because part of the charm of this is just how unique and different it is. And when we all try to be unique and different, we end up becoming the same at the end of the day. There's also another thing, and I feel like this is becoming again a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's an Apple design manager based in London who recently came out with a top 60 portfolios for getting a FANG job. And this was widely shared, extremely popular post. And yes, everyone here, supremely talented, everything looks great. But when I look deeper into it, I'm like, there's a complete lack of consistency in this, how this was curated and evaluated. It's kind of like, I'm gonna cherry pick a bunch of cool things I've seen and try to shoehorn this into, this is how you get a job at a FANG company. Can these designers get a job at FANG companies? Probably, maybe, but it's not really a good indication, in my opinion. And if we look through some of these portfolios, I'm just going to open up a bunch of random ones. And I know some of them are graphic designers. So, again, like I think graphic design and product design are different enough nowadays that we should not be conflating the two. This really should just be like for product design and UI design. And it's like you look through this stuff and it's like, yes, it's extremely cool. It's delightful. These are some really cool interactions, some animations I talked about earlier. Do I really understand this person as a designer? I'm not really sure. How would they fit in my company? I'm not really sure. But I do know that this is what's hot or in like the flavor of the day currently. When we look through this, I think what's clear is that this is the kind of stuff that you would not be able to make with any of the template systems out there. You cannot one-shot this with AI. You do have to build this incrementally, and you have to make something that's very customized and not scalable. Like this would never work as a product or a business website, but it does work for a design, for an individual designer as a portfolio. This is cool. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that this is a cool looking set of images, and this person knows graphic design really well, knows spacing, typography, color usage, and interactions. But how much more does it tell me? And is that the most important thing that design teams need right now? And I think the answer is probably yes. That's just what people want. This is probably the most, I don't say normal looking portfolio, but this is closest to what portfolios used to look like. You describe who you are in the very top, the work. I would say that out of all the portfolios shown, this is like an outlier. I'm surprised that this was curated with the other portfolio pieces because this seems very norm. I don't say like normal is probably the wrong term, but it is an outlier because everything else is so unique and so different, and this one is so similar to most people's portfolios. Question: Could you mention that what type? Can you mention that type of industry you're referring to when you this is you what people want right now? I'm talking about tech companies in general. It's not really about industries. It's about tech companies versus legacy companies. So the way I see tech companies are companies like Ramp, Anthropic, Google. They are focused on technology. Design is typically seen as a profit center as opposed to cost center, and as opposed to something like a bank, which typically would not be considered a tech company. That's more of like a legacy company that uses tech as a cost center. However, companies like Mercury, which is like a very forward focused banking company, would be considered a tech company versus a bank or a legacy company. Um, there are his students' work. Okay, well, I guess he's included some of his students in there as well, which is quite convenient if you're his student to be placed with a bunch of other talented designers. But yeah, so you can start to see like every single portfolio here is very, very different and unique. You cannot get this from a typical template, for example. And that uniqueness is what people are looking for right now. So it's really hard to describe like what should you build as a portfolio besides that it needs to be different than other portfolios out there. So again, this is kind of a self-fulfilling cycle. You have designers who copy the patterns. Well, you have these lists of top portfolios being shared. And then once it's been shared, designers sort of copy these patterns because they're like, okay, if I want to work at a FANG, I should do this. And now hiring managers expect the patterns because that's what's being shown as hireable designers. And then you have people who then teach how to become a top designer by crafting portfolios that look this way, which, by the way, I think this is a marketing lead that leads, like if you like this, you can then sign up for his ultimate interview course for designers. So it's a self-fulfilling cycle in many ways. I'm going to skip to the end and just kind of talk about the portfolios that were submitted. I know we're at time right now. Sorry, and thank you for your patience. I just